Hello, and welcome to Principles of Management 3113, Chapter 11, looking at individual differences and behavior. So, looking at people and how they are different from one another and how that can potentially impact the things we do as managers and the kinds of issues that we might need to take into account when it comes to being a good manager. So, we're going to take a look at these topics over the course of this lecture. First of all, we want to look at from the perspective of how people can potentially be different in the workplace from the perspective of what we call diversity and what kinds of things as managers we want to look at both the individual and group levels from a diversity perspective. And then we're going to deep dive into how people are different from one another from a personality perspective. So we're going to talk about a lot of different individual differences that people have one from another. And then we're going to talk about how people have different attitudes, how those attitudes potentially form, and how attitudes can potentially influence people's behaviors. And of course, one of the biggest behaviors that we care about in the workplace as managers are performance. So the relationship between attitudes and behaviors in the form of performance is kind of a big deal for us from a managerial perspective. And of course, a big factor in this process is how do we perceive our surroundings. So we'll talk a little bit about how attitudes forms as a result of our perceptions. Right? So maybe our job as managers can be influenced by the attitudes that our employees have, and of course our attitudes that our employees have are going to be influenced by the perceptions that they take in. So we potentially can influence those perceptions in different ways if we understand how people are perceiving their surroundings and their environment. And of course, another thing that we're also going to discuss real briefly is the idea of stress in the workplace that can influence employee behavior, and maybe some techniques that we can use to mitigate or minimize stress in the workplace as managers. Okay, the first thing I want to talk about is just the idea that we have a lot of people in the workplace today and moving into the future who are different from one another. So we think about differences at work, we think about differences in population, and this is becoming more and more of a relevant subject. If you look at what the census data tells us, this is from the United States Census Bureau from the government. By the year 2050, they anticipate that there will be no majority of any type of ethnic group in this country. So by the time we get to the year 2050, we'll have no such thing as a majority group. We'll have a plurality of different types of people in this country. So we'll have a very, very much more diversified population. So that means for you, as people going out into the workforce and working with other people, this is an issue that you are going to definitely be working with even more so than you are right now, or will be working with moving forward into the future. So this is something that we need to take advantage of and think about from the perspective of what is it that this means for us as both employees and future managers. All right, so what do we mean by diversity? So basically, any time we're talking about how people are both alike and unlike, or alike and different from one another, we're thinking about diversity issues, right? So similarities and differences, and this can be on a multitude, a spectrum of different areas. But a lot of times when we think about diversity, we get wrapped up specifically on surface level issues like gender, race, religion, ethnicity, orientations, socioeconomics, etc. But in organizations, diversity can exist on a lot of different levels. Any variety of these types of issues can create a diversified workforce. So we have situations where organizations have people with different backgrounds, and we have a diverse environment, we have a diversified workforce, and a lot of times workforces are diversified just by the very nature of how people come together and work at this place. And we don't intentionally create a diversified workforce, it is just there because people are people and the population is what the population is. And when we hire people, they have different backgrounds. Now, some organizations have been required to create a more diversified workforce. And that's because they have a history of discrimination, right? And because they have had a history of discrimination, they've had to undergo a purposeful attempt to overcome that. And we call that purposeful attempt affirmative action, right? So whenever an organization has had a history of intentionally excluding certain groups, certain types of people from their organization, they have to engage in what we call affirmative action processes to try to bring in excluded groups or minorities or women into their organization to make it a more diversified organization. So I'm going to show you all a video that talks about why diversity is important to organizations. And this organization specifically is one that you're all very familiar with, and that's Starbucks.
So I'm a first-generation American. My parents were immigrants. They met here. They were from the Philippines. And growing up, before I started school, I didn't even speak English.
Pretty much everything I've done in my life, I've found myself as being one of the few individuals of color in any situation.
My mother was born in China, and I grew up in a very white place where I was the only one who looked different. And I have that experience, and I know what that feels like. And I also know how much I had to offer that sometimes got overlooked.
One of the primary reasons that Starbucks has succeeded throughout all these years is the diversity of people who work for the company.
Diversity, from a simple point, is about who we are. We want to make sure that we have a cross-section of people that come from different perspectives that work for our organization. Inclusion for an organization is about what we do.
It's a way of thinking. It's a way of encouraging diverse conversations and thought and thinking.
In my view, the way to get the best talent is to get diversity of talent. People with different experiences, people with different backgrounds, people with sometimes different values who can bring different perspectives to the work. Their differences are celebrated because that's what sparks innovation.
And how that happens is you're bringing these cross-sections of people together. They're creating innovative products, solutions, and needs. They're solving the needs that the larger community has.
So I think we are better able to reflect the needs and desires of the customers when we have a more diverse workforce.
First thing I try to get leaders to understand is that diversity and inclusion is not a destination, it's a journey.
I think you can be who you are. I think it's about being open and trying to understand the differences more than anything. We're a workplace where people can be their full selves, where they bring their full talents. They're not covering anything.
I try and model it in terms of the conversations I have, the decisions I make.
And when we have the ability to understand all of those people who are out in the world, when we connect with them authentically, when we sit and talk with them, when we have leaders who understand and are not afraid of other individuals,
we can recognize their differences and celebrate those differences, not try to change or cover those differences.
That's how we create environments where organizations thrive, not only in the present, but for a long time to come.
And that's what I want to do as a leader, and that's what I hope my leaders can do for me.
It's critically important to our future, and it's critically important to the culture and values of what Starbucks is about.
Okay, so there you go. There's an example of why diversity is important to an organization, specifically Starbucks, as they talk about those types of issues. Right? So they understand, they recognize that we have a diversified population, we have a diversified society, and their customers are also of a diverse background. So they need to find ways to be inclusive as they seek to serve their customers, bring in people to work for them that represent their customers as well, so they can do a better job of serving them and being successful, right? So we're going to talk about that as a means of being successful as an organization. Okay, now, when we think about diversity, there's different kinds of diversity that we can discuss. We have what we call surface level diversity. That's basically the kind of diversity we're talking about when we think about stuff that you can see, right? So age, race, sex, that's the stuff that's generally not changeable, something that you can typically measure, something that you can immediately observe, right? That's those surface level issues. Deep level diversity are stuff that's on the inside, stuff that makes us who we are as a person down deep, right? So you can't really understand deep level diversity until you actually talk to somebody, right? Or until you witness their behavior and see how they respond to situations. What we really want in organizations is this idea of what we call social integration, right? When people work together, they understand each other, and they become psychologically attracted to each other because they recognize their differences and what those differences bring to each other and the value that they add to the organization for solving problems and being creative and being part of a bigger team and being successful as a group. So working together to get the job done, right? That's the idea behind social integration. Now the text talks about what they call the diversity wheel as another way of thinking about the different levels of diversity. And of course at the center they have the notion of personality, which is what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about in this chapter. So that's like the deep level diversity. You can only figure that out by understanding somebody, who they are from an internal perspective. They also talk about what they call internal dimensions, such as age, race, ethnicity. And they have these external dimensions like who you are from your work experience and your educational background, etc. And then the most external or the most outer level is what they have from an organizational dimension. So this is another way of looking at different levels of diversity in this particular perspective. So this is another way of understanding how diversity can be viewed from multiple levels. Now, if we think about why this is important, it's important because society is changing. There are trends, obviously. The workforce is aging. More and more people who are of the millennial age group are becoming important in the workforce. More and more women are in the workforce. We have more and more people of different ethnicities and races in the workforce. We're seeing more and more people of different sexual orientations in the workforce. The U.S. population has at least now 10 million people that identify with different orientations now. People with different physical and mental abilities are now part of our workforce, especially with people returning from different military engagements in the Middle East. They're coming back with different kinds of physical disabilities as a result of serving in the armed forces. We have different people with different educational levels. There's all different kinds of forms of diversity when it comes to things that we have to think about from the workforce and how to manage these people with their different types of things that they're bringing to the table. And what we as managers can do to help provide accommodations for that is important. Now, problems that we see when it comes to managing diversity can potentially fall into a lot of different categories, and we're going to talk about some of these today. We see things like stereotypes and prejudices. We'll talk about what that means a little bit later. But we also see stuff that we've discussed in the HR chapter, notions of discrimination. We see issues where people are somewhat resistant to being more inclusive and having a diversification of of their organization, and being willing to include people who are different from themselves in their organizations. So we see some people who are more negative toward a diversity type of climate, right? Or maybe even being hostile toward people who are different than themselves. And this is a problem, right? Because we are becoming a more diversified society and more diversified culture, and our population becomes more and more diverse. We have to embrace this and have to, as managers, figure out ways to understand and incorporate people with different types of backgrounds into our organizations if we're going to be successful moving forward. So how do we manage this, right? Now, the trick or the key here is treating people fairly, but that doesn't mean we have to treat everybody exactly the same way, right? That's one thing that we have to keep in mind. So understanding how people have different values, different backgrounds, different perspectives, but using those different backgrounds and perspectives to help us solve problems and be more creative and make the organization more profitable, right? So if we can leverage our diversity in successful ways, we'll probably be more successful than those organizations who don't do so sooner, right? So if we take advantage of this as a potential opportunity, we're probably going to be more successful, right? If we recognize that we can have a more diversified workforce that more accurately reflects our customer base or the population base that's out there, we'll be able to serve those people better, right? And one way we can do that is make sure that the leadership in our organization understands why this is important, getting their commitment, and then going out there and getting a diversified workforce, getting the right kind of people into our organization that reflects the kind of customers that we want and the kinds of talent and the kinds of skills that they can bring to the table that are going to actually help us to accomplish what we want to accomplish and then retain them. We talked all about those different issues related to HR. In this case, we're actually going after specific individuals who help us to create a more diversified workforce. Now, again, why is this important? Why do we want to have a diversified workforce? Well, if we can manage diversity well, we can create a competitive advantage, right? If we have a highly diversified employee base with access to lots of different information, lots of different experiences, lots of different backgrounds, lots of different understanding of different types of individuals, different types of people, we can potentially have the ability to leverage that information to be more creative, to solve more problems, to sell to different types of groups, to just be a more well-rounded type of organization and be able to serve more people and provide more value, right? So there's all kinds of opportunity for us as organizations to decrease our turnover, decrease our absenteeism, help us, if we have a diversified workforce, people are going to like working for us better. They're going to recognize what we're bringing to them. We're not going to have expensive lawsuits because we're discriminating against people. We're going to be able to attract and retain more talented workforce. We're going to have the potential for greater growth of our business. There's a lot of value that we can obtain from having a very diversified and well-run organization from a diversity perspective. Okay, so I've made all these arguments for diversity. I always thought this was a funny cartoon or funny meme related to this particular topic, right? So, kid comes home, daughter's kindergarten teacher showed him on this picture on MLK Day, right? She came home from school, told me these were exact words. Yep, brown-skinned people, white-skinned people, we're the same. We're all disgusting on the inside, right? You got the white egg and the brown egg, you break them open. Same thing on the inside. Yeah, we're all disgusting. Right, obviously. Okay. I thought it was funny. Anyway, the next topic I want to discuss. So we've discussed the importance of kind of surface level issues. That's obviously a big deal. and we need to include people who have different surface level diversity issues in our organization. But another thing that's also important that we need to discuss and we need to talk about is this idea of personality, because everyone has a personality. It doesn't matter what their surface level looks like. Every individual on this planet has a different personality, and everybody's personality potentially can have an impact on how they interact with other people, right? So personalities are also a key factor in potentially influencing how people are going to impact others and how they're going to impact their ability to get their jobs done. So when we define personality, usually we call it the stable set of psychological traits or attributes that kind of define someone, give us our identity, right? When we think about who we are as an individual, we often frame it in the context of our quote unquote personality, right? And different people have different kinds of ways of thinking about who they are from a personality perspective. Now, it's not easy to quantify exactly what we mean by personality. There's different ways of kind of assessing this. One way of doing it is through what we call the Big Five, right? The Big Five. So this is a trait-based approach to understanding personality, and it basically argues that there are 5 broad personality traits, right, based on descriptors of how people behave, right? So the Big Five include openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So you can think of that from the acronym OCEAN, right? The ocean of personality. So I'm going to go through each one of these in a little bit more detail. So the first one is openness. Openness is the idea that we are more or less broadly interested in new ideas or new experiences, or more or less conventional in our thinking, or imaginative or curious in what we're trying to accomplish, right? So if you're more creative and curious and more of a maybe thrill-seeking mindset, you would be more openness. You'd be higher on openness. If you're more conservative, more following the rules, more dogmatic, then you would be less on the openness spectrum. Right? That's the first one. The next one is what we call conscientiousness. Conscientiousness is the degree to how systematic or organized or disciplined or achievement-oriented or careful or responsible you are. Typically, if you're more conscientious, you have few goals that you're targeted on, that you're trying to fulfill all at the same time, or few at the same time. If you're lower on conscientiousness, you're more scattered, right? You've got a lot of things going on at once. Maybe you're a little bit more careless, you're a little bit more disorganized, you're not quite as responsible. And I'm not saying this to say that it's not like a bad thing, it's just you're not quite as well put together, right? You're just a little bit all over the place. Extroversion, this describes how much energy you get from your social interactions, right? If you are really, really talkative and you really enjoy being around people, and you're maybe just a little bit more assertive in how you handle others, and you really just enjoy being in front of a group, you tend to be more extroverted. If you get your energy by being alone, and you are really drained by social interactions, and you tend to be maybe a little bit more reserved, you tend to be more introverted. Agreeableness, this is this notion of how good-natured or forgiving or understanding you are. Agreeableness is often we often think of disagreeable people as being very hard to get along with, right? These are the people that have a short fuse. They don't like doing what they don't want to do, right? They're very ill-natured natured, you might say, right? So in all of these, I'm trying to give you an example of someone who you might recognize that might fall into one of these categories. And I think for the most part, these are pretty good examples. The last one is neuroticism. And another term that we often use for neuroticism is the reverse of neuroticism, which is emotional stability. So if you're low on neuroticism, you're high on emotional stability. So it's the same concept, it's just one end or the other. Right? So if you're highly neurotic, you're low on emotional stability. So if you're highly emotionally stable, you're very calm, secure, poised. You can handle situations. You're not going to be thrown for a loop. If you're very neurotic, you tend to be very anxious and things bother you, and you're going to get more depressed more easily. And when something happens that you can't handle it, you're going to just kind of freak out, right? That's what a neurotic person does. Right? That's kind of what happens when we look at this. Now, this is the Big Five. Supposedly, every person in the world can be measured according to where they fall in the Big Five, and the Big Five is supposed to encompass most of our personality traits, not all of our personality traits. We'll talk more about some other aspects of personality here in a second, but most of what we think about from personality can potentially be boiled down to issues we see in the Big Five. Now, one thing I did not mention, but I would like to mention. We go back up to this one, go back up to conscientiousness. Conscientiousness, the trait of conscientiousness, has a significant association with job performance. So the more highly conscientious you are, the more likely you are to be better at your job performance, which kind of makes sense. If you're organized, you're self-disciplined, you're responsible, you're achievement-oriented, you've got your stuff together, you're more likely to be better at performing your job. Right? That's what the research shows us. That's what the data show us. So if your personality is more of a conscientiousness perspective, then you're more likely to be successful at your job. That's what we see. Okay. Another way of looking at personality is through the lens of what we call core self-evaluations. Core self-evaluation. This is kind of a broader perspective, right? This kind of takes personality and kind of looks at it from how different traits overlap over one another. So we've got 4 different kinds of issues here, right? So we've got efficacy, self-efficacy, self-esteem, locus of control, and emotional stability. And where these 4 individual traits, these positive individual traits overlap, that's your core self-evaluation. So how you think about yourself and your ability to understand the world and deal with the world is your core self-evaluation. So this is kind of another perspective on personality, a little bit different than the Big Five trait approach. Right? So core self-evaluation, kind of the overlap of these 4 different lower level traits. So the first aspect of this is self-efficacy. And when we think about self-efficacy, efficacy is this understanding of, do I believe I can do something? Right? And in this case, we're talking about what we call a generalized self-efficacy. So do we think that we can do something just kind of across the board? Do I think that in general, I can handle a situation, I can do a lot of different types of things and a lot of different types of situations, a lot of different kinds of work, right? So do I have like a generalized self-belief in my ability to perform? Right? So if you have a high degree of generalized self-efficacy, you kind of have confidence in your abilities, you have a confidence in yourself. And if you, as a manager, understand that your employee has a high degree of generalized self-efficacy, then it means that your employee probably is somebody that you can assign more difficult assignments to, maybe let them have a little more autonomy. They're not going to be somebody that just gives up real easily, right? So you want to give these kinds of people more challenging work, right? Give them something to push them a little harder. You don't want to give them any kind of job that's going to be really boring or tedious, right? The next element of core self-evaluations is the notion of self-esteem, right? So how well do people actually like themselves, right? If you have a high degree of self-esteem, you tend to handle issues, failures better. If you have a low degree of self-esteem, you tend to get really caught up in your failures and you spiral and you focus on what's wrong with you and things go poorly and you just kind of get out of hand, right? So if you as a manager recognize that your employee has a low degree of self-esteem, you're going to have to find ways to reinforce that, right? Give them more positive feedback. Maybe give them smaller tasks that they can handle that don't damage their self-esteem. Give them ways to build up their confidence. Help find ways to coach them up if they're having trouble, right? So individuals with high core self-evaluations tend to have high generalized self-efficacy, tend to have high self-esteem. Another element of CSE, core self-evaluations, is this notion of what we call locus of control. And the idea behind locus of control is all about who controls your destiny. Do you control your destiny, or does somebody else control your destiny? Are you in the hands of the fates, right? If you have what we call an internal locus of control, you believe that you set your own agenda and nobody's going to tell you where you're going. You control what's happening in your life. If you have an external locus of control, you think that things just occur and you can't stop them from happening, right? You can't determine your own fate. You can't determine your own destiny. So as a manager, if you recognize that your employee has an external locus of control, it means it's going to be easier for you to tell them what to do. That's basically what it means. If they have an internal locus of control, that means they want more autonomy. They want more control over their lives. They want more power for making decisions about what's going on. So you'll be able to hopefully tailor the kinds of jobs and the kinds of work that they'll be able to accomplish. The fourth element of core self-evaluations is one of the big 5 traits, emotional stability. Right? So, if you feel highly emotionally stable, you're really secure in who you are, you're very cool, calm, collected, you don't have a lot of anxiety, you don't view the world from a real negative frame, if that's in combination with a high generalized degree of self-efficacy, if you have a high degree of self-esteem and you have an internal locus of control, you're going to have a great degree of core self-evaluation. And what the research shows is the higher degree of core self-evaluation overall, we tend to see greater levels of job performance. Right? So that's potentially important. All right, another personality issue that's relevant in the workplace is this notion of what we call emotional intelligence. Now, we often talk about IQ, right, is important. That's just general intelligence. Emotional intelligence is different. Emotional intelligence is all about how do we understand feelings and emotions in both ourselves and the people around us? How do we monitor feelings and recognize when both we're feeling our own feelings and when somebody else is feeling theirs? Right? And if we are good at monitoring feelings, both ourselves and other people, it can potentially influence a lot of things like our satisfaction, our ability to control our emotions, perhaps our level of efficacy that we understand, our willingness to help other people at work, which we call that citizenship behavior. Talk more about that later. There's a lot of different relationships between emotional intelligence and a lot of these workplace outcomes that are important. But the four elements of emotional intelligence that we really care about are these. We have what we call self-awareness. Right? This is the most essential part of this notion that we understand our own emotions and we can regulate them. Right? That's important. This next part is control. That's the self-management. So first we understand what our emotions are. That's self-awareness. Self-management is the second element. Right? Your ability to control your emotions and be able to adapt and control. Right? Those are the first two. The second two are your ability to understand others. Right? That's the social awareness element. And then your ability to use that social awareness in a way where you can communicate it and use your skills of communication to build relationships. Right? So that's the relationship management element. So the better you are at these four factors, the higher level of emotional intelligence that you could potentially have. Right? So emotional intelligence, EI, that's our ability to create, or our ability to carry out some accurate reasoning about our emotions and our ability to use our emotions and emotional knowledge to enhance our thoughts and our relationships with other people. And of course, understanding this, having higher levels of EI, is potentially going to be associated with a lot of really nice outcomes. Now, some other elements of personality that I want to discuss. A lot of the things that we talked about so far have been very nice, very pleasant, very potentially beneficial types of personality. But I think we all know that not everybody has a great, sunny, pleasant, wonderful thing when it comes to their personality. Everything we discussed so far, you could label as what we call a bright personality. But there are definitely elements to personality that are not so bright. And scholars have gone on to label some of these darker, more sinister, more malevolent, more quote-unquote bad or dark personalities, what we call the dark triad. So I'm going to show you all a clip here of an individual who's expressing some dark personality, and then we'll talk about each one of these in a little bit more detail. So if you recall, you've seen this guy before. This is J.R. Ewing from Ewing Oil.
Oh, my daddy sure would be proud of me. Sitting here, drinking with you.
Your daddy was a good man. We cut a fine deal together.
That's what he used to tell me. He had a very high regard for you, Mr. Ewing. Said you knew more ways to skin a cat than anyone he'd ever met.
Well, this is a tough business. When an opportunity presents itself, you just got to take advantage of it.
That's just the way I see it. There I was sitting around trying to figure out ways to build my own fortune. Out of the blue, you called. Well, that sure seemed like opportunity to me.
Yeah, if you're smart, keep your eyes open and do what you're told, you'll find all kinds of ways to skin a cat.
Knowledge is a wonderful thing, Mr. Ewing, but so is a proper share of the pie. And we never quite set out what I stand to gain from all this, aside from watching you operate.
What exactly do you want?
Well, I want to be just like you, Mr. Ewing. Successful, highly regarded in the oil industry. with a flourishing little company of my own, of course.
Didn't your daddy ever tell you how fair I was to my friends?
Yes, sir. In a fashion. I never quite figured out why he died broke and you always rode high on the hog.
Well, your daddy lacked the killer instinct. He forgave those who transgressed against him. People just weren't afraid of him. And he overlooked old JR's golden rules.
And what might they be?
Don't forgive and don't forget. And do unto others before they do unto you. And most especially, keep your eye on your friends, because your enemies will take care of themselves. Oh, and one other thing. The oil business is a little bit like a poker game. It's good to get caught bluffing early on, because after that, somebody's going to call you when you got a winning hand. That is, of course, unless you're playing with somebody better than you.
Well, if I didn't know better, Mr. Ewing, I'd think you were giving me some kind of a warning. But you don't think I'd double-cross you?
Oh, of course I do. I'd be disappointed if that thought hadn't crossed your mind already. You see, I wouldn't want to work with anybody who wouldn't turn a deal to their own advantage. I just want you to know I got my eye on you.
You're everything my daddy said.
And more. Here's to our mutual success.
There you go. There's old JR. He's always up to something. He's got his golden rules. Yeah. JR's got what we would definitely call some dark personality, right? He's got his own way of doing things, and they are definitely not very nice. So when we think about the dark triad, these more sinister aspects of personality, researchers have determined that there are basically three elements to this. There's what we call Machiavellianism, there's what we call narcissism, and there's what we call psychopathy. Now, both narcissism and psychopathy, they have severe forms where you can be put into clinical institutions because you have such severe cases of them. What we're discussing here are really more the non-clinical forms, right? The forms that exist in quote-unquote normal populations like you and me and everybody else here running around in society. We're not talking about a psychopath like a serial killer. That's not what we're talking about here. So I'll discuss more what I mean here in a second. But we're talking about quote-unquote normal people that exhibit certain characteristics that fall into what we call these categories. So let's talk about each one of these in a little bit more detail. So the first one is the Machiavellian. The Machiavellian is our JR. JR does exhibit a couple of the other characteristics as well, but he really kind of falls more into the Machiavellian type trait. So Machiavellians, these are people who are all about getting what they want. They don't care about rules. They don't care about ethics. They don't really have any kind of compulsion against doing what they want to do to get what they want to get, right? They're very distrustful. He talked about, he was like, oh, I'd be surprised if you hadn't already gone behind my back, right? They're very distrustful. They want status. They want control. They like to manipulate, right? And they don't care about ethics. That's what Machiavellians do. So some of you probably recognize some of these other characters I've got up here. Littlefinger from Game of Thrones, very Machiavellian. Sideshow Bob from The Simpsons, very Machiavellian. All of these individuals are examples of people with Machiavellian characteristics. Narcissists are people who are all about themselves, right? People who want people to admire them. And I'm not saying this to be negative. I'm not saying anything about this to be political. I don't want you to take that at all. I'm just stating this as a fact. People who are all about wanting attention and who want admiration and who want love are narcissists. And we can love them for that too. And sometimes they can be very successful, and sometimes they can be very good, but they are still narcissists, right? Now, the elements of narcissism include this idea that I am potentially better than you are just because who I am, right? That's what we call entitlement. And because we feel entitled, we tend to be exploitative. Narcissists also like to be in leadership positions because, of course, they want to be leaders. They believe that they have more ability than others. They like to be in influential positions because they like the attention. They like to be able to have power and positions of authority and be in places where others recognize their greatness. They also tend to have a certain degree of arrogance and superiority over other people, right? That's just an aspect of narcissism. I've got plenty of other examples of people who are definitely narcissistic. They also are very self-absorbed, right? They talk about themselves, they talk about how great they are, they talk about how important they are, they talk about admiring themselves all the time. So people who are narcissists tend to be very, very vain, high degree of admiration for themselves, and degree of desire to have you admire them. That's what a narcissist is all about. And if they are extremely extreme on these characteristics, then they can be put into some sort of institution. But all the people that I'm showing you here are not that bad. Now, they have their faults, but they're not clinical narcissists. Psychopaths are people who do not have a conscience or have very little conscience, right? These are individuals who have very difficult time forming emotional attachments to others. And because they don't feel things for others, it's very easy for them to take advantage of others, right? They don't feel guilt. They don't feel empathy. They don't feel shame. They don't feel loyalty. And because of that, it doesn't matter to them when they hurt other people, right? If you don't have a conscience, it doesn't matter if you take something away from somebody else, right? You don't have to worry about hurting someone if you don't feel anything toward them, right? So if you have this trait, you're going to have a reduced capacity for relationship building, you're going to have reduced capacity for empathy, you're going to have reduced capacity for guilt. You tend to have problems with being impulsive. People who are subclinical psychopaths are often thrill-seeking. They tend to be antisocial. They have poor behavioral control sometimes. There's all different kinds of issues related to psychopathic behavior. And again, these are subclinical psychopaths. We're not talking about, serial killers and like mass murderers or anything like that. We're talking about people who are existing in the normal population, but are still doing things that are not necessarily that great. Okay, so those are personality factors. Those are things that make people different from one another. There are also other elements within individuals that influence behavior at work. And those can include our attitudes and our values. We've talked about values before, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about those. But next I want to talk about attitudes. Now, the study of all these things, the study of attitudes, the study of values, the study of personality, the study of behavior, is kind of all categorized really broadly as what we call OB, or organizational behavior. And you can take a whole course on organizational behavior. That's one of the options for you to take as a student here at Mississippi State. If you're a management major, it is a required course. The idea is you want to understand why people do the things that they do at work, right? That's organizational behavior. Trying to predict why people behave the way that they do at work, and what kinds of things influences how people behave the way that they do at work, right? That's where this is all coming from. What's the relationship between these different factors and how people are able to accomplish what they accomplish at an individual level at work. That's what organizational behavior is all about. All right, so let's talk a little bit about values first. So values, we've talked about this before. Those are those ideals that guide our behavior from how we think about things. Attitudes are a little bit different. Attitudes are our dispositions that we have towards certain things. And our attitudes change. Right? Our attitudes influence our behaviors, but our attitudes can be altered. Sure, our values potentially can change over time, but generally we pick our value systems and we hold to our value systems for long periods of time. We don't change our values a lot. Our attitudes can fluctuate. Attitudes are much more malleable, you might say. So, for an example, job satisfaction is an attitude. How we feel about our job, how satisfied we are with our boss. And how satisfied we are with our job. That potentially could influence a behavior such as turnover, leaving the organization. If we're not satisfied with our job, if we're an unhappy worker, we're less likely to demonstrate good performance. If we are a happy worker, we're less likely to quit, right? So understanding attitudes is important if we're going to be a good manager, to figure out why people are behaving in the way that they're behaving. So how do we understand attitude, right? There are some components to an attitude, right? We have what we call the affective component, we have the cognitive component, and we have a behavioral component, right? So the feeling part is the affective component. What's the emotional element of an attitude? The cognitive component is our knowledge or belief component. What do we believe about the situation? We have our feeling about the situation, we have our belief about a situation, and then we have the behavioral element. How do we think we are going to behave about the situation? Right? So it's I feel, I believe, I intend. These are the three aspects of attitude. Right? So all three components are often manifested at any given time. You can have, for example, if you call into an organization, you get one of those telephone tree menus, you can potentially be very irritated by that, and you can have a response. You could say, I hate being given the runaround, right? That's your affective component. You have a feeling about that. You could say, that company doesn't know how to take care of its customers, right? That could be your cognitive component. That's your perception of your knowledge of the situation. And then you could say, I'll never call them again, right? That could be your behavioral component. That's your intentions. That's your response. That's your attitude. That's how you're forming your attitude about your future interaction with that particular organization. Right? So you're going to form an attitude based on that interaction with that organization. Now, when it comes to the formation of attitudes and our relationships with how we behave, so the relationships between values and behaviors, the relationships between attitudes and behaviors, sometimes we have to take into account this issue, something we call cognitive dissonance. Right? So we have an attitude about something or a belief about something, and then we also behave in a certain way. But what we believe and how we behave are incompatible. Right? And because of that incompatibility, we have a psychological discomfort, and that's called cognitive dissonance. Right? How do we deal with that discomfort? How do we deal with that discomfort? Can you deal with the problem? How do you deal with it? I'm going to show you all a little video that kind of demonstrates cognitive dissonance and how we can deal with it. makes a little bit more sense, I think.
Leon Festigner founded cognitive dissonance in 1957 and is defined as when our behavior conflicts with our attitudes. This causes discomfort, and in response, we try to reduce it. Cognitive dissonance can be reduced by either changing our behavior to bring it in line with what we think is right, or by changing our ideas of what we think is right to continue on with a behavior. Cognitive dissonance can be seen in every aspect of human life, whether it is in our culture or our behavior. Here, we have found an example in the popular media that perfectly demonstrates what cognitive dissonance is.
I'm pregnant. Ross. Ross. Okay, whenever you're ready. And you're the father, by the way, but you got it. Can I get you some water?
I'm good.
Ross, there is no pressure on you, okay? I mean, you can be as involved as you want.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't understand. How this happened. we used the condom.
I know, but, you know, condoms only work like 97% of the time.
What? What? Well, they should put that on the box!
In this scene, it is evident that Ross is feeling extremely uncomfortable in this situation and is surprised by the news of Rachel's pregnancy. Ross is experiencing cognitive dissonance, which, as described before, is a negative feeling that results when someone's actions and beliefs clash and contradict one another. Ross is experiencing this feeling because he believed that he and Rachel were being careful and he did not want a baby with someone he was not dating. However, she still ended up pregnant, which led to this feeling of discomfort. Ross's actions led to a consequence that could threaten his self-image, and because of that, this feeling of dissonance is present.
They do!
No, they don't! Well, they should put it in huge block letters!
Come on, let's just forget about the condom.
Oh, well, I may as well have.
Listen, you know what? I was really freaked out, too, when I found
Hey,
out.
no, I'm not freaked out. I'm indignant as a consumer.
In this part of the scene, it is easy for the audience to tell that Ross is extremely surprised, even though he says he isn't. Instead, he is engaging in a process known as dissonance reduction. In order to decrease this feeling of dissonance that Ross is feeling, he attempts to change his cognitions by stating that he is not freaked out at all over the news of her pregnancy, and as if he is not scared that he is the father. Also, Ross tries arguing with the condom company, even though it is written on the box that they only work 97% of the time. In this case, Ross is attempting to self-justify his actions by excusing them and placing the blame on the condom company. He is blaming the pregnancy on the failed condom and not on himself. Therefore, he is taking part in external attribution.
You know what? Let's talk later.
No, I want to talk now, okay? I want to talk to the president of the condom company.
Okay, you know what? Maybe I should come back.
Yeah, I'll press one.
Okay, so that's an example of cognitive dissonance. So we've got this behavior that doesn't match up with our belief, or what we do doesn't match up with what we think should be done. And how do we resolve that, right? We have to find a way to resolve it. And some people handle it better than others. Right? How do we rationalize what we do? How do we figure out a way to do the mental gymnastics to get around why it's okay to do what we're doing? Right? Are we more okay with the comforting lie or with the unpleasant truth? Right? That's the old issue when it comes to cognitive dissonance. Can you live with the problem, or can you face it? Right? That's the issue. So when it comes to other issues related to these processes, we also have to think about this notion of perception, right? Because perceptions impact how we behave as well, right? How we take in information from our surroundings are potentially going to influence our attitudes, maybe how our personality influences our perceptions as well, but how we take in information, how we process information, how we allow it to be impacted within us is also going to influence how we engage in behaviors at work, right? So interpreting information is important as we engage in our surroundings, as we engage with other people, and we engage in our environment. So perception is this process. We interpret and understand our surroundings. It's a complex process, but we can think about it in just 4 basic steps, right? And obviously, from this perspective, we're not really as concerned about all the theoretical processes involved in perception, how perception might be distorted, et cetera, but we're more concerned about just the basic 4 stages in the perception process, because a lot of times we see misunderstandings or errors in judgment or problems that can happen when people have perceptions. And these perceptual errors that occur can lead to mistakes, can lead to misperceptions, can lead to problems, that can lead to damage, that can lead to issues, that can lead to misbehaviors, that can lead to misjudgments, that can create issues for how we interact with one another, right? So we think about perception, it's all about how we take in information, right? So that's that first step. That's selectively paying attention to a situation. Did you even notice what was going on around you, right? Your perception, it's very, potentially selective. How did you, once you take in the information, how did you evaluate it? How did you interpret it? What did you actually understand about it? What does it mean to you? And then once you have it, how do you store it in your memory? Right? What is it about that situation that is meaningful to you? And then later on, the retrieval process, right? What kinds of associations do you make with that piece of information? What kinds of judgments? Did you store it with one part of your memory that has very positive and meaningful things to you from one perspective, or is it in a more negative, dark place? Right? What do you recall about that piece of information that influences what you understand about it, right? So a lot of times when we take in information, we process information, we perceive information, it can have an influence on a lot of other factors and a lot of other thoughts and a lot of behaviors that result as we think about things moving forward. And distortions in our perceptions are important because they can lead to things like what we call here stereotyping, right? So we can stereotype when we make attributions about individuals based on characteristics that we think that individual has based on something that they possess that we think that everyone in that group should possess, right? You belong to one group, so that means that you have to have that particular characteristic, right? So you're a member of a group, so that means you have to possess a particular characteristic. And there's different types of stereotypes, right? We have sex role stereotypes. So only that kind of job is supposed to be done by that kind of gender. Right? We have age stereotypes. Only that kind of age group should be working in that kind of job, or people of that kind of age cannot ever do that kind of work because they're just too unwilling to learn new things, right? Or they're too unhealthy, or whatever. And of course, we can also have stereotypes related to race or ethnicity. Right? People of this race are better at this kind of work than this kind of race, or whatever. Right? There's all different kinds of stereotypes out there, and I'm sure that many of you have experienced these firsthand. And I don't want to imagine the kinds of problems that you potentially have had, and this is a result of distortions in people's perceptions and experiences that they've had over their lifetimes, and problems that they have perceived that are obviously incorrect. And part of this is through a process that we call implicit bias, right? Implicit bias. So a lot of times people can have a bias against someone else, have a belief or attitude that affects their behavior in a way that they don't even understand, right? They make decisions, they make choices, and it's in a negative fashion toward one group or another, and they don't even realize that they're doing it. Right? We call that an implicit bias. And of course, implicit bias is a very difficult thing to discuss because people get really emotional about it, people get really upset about it, but it occurs. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that it is something that exists, and it is something that is definitely a problem. And I'm going to show you an example of how this exists in small children.
Michaela is a 7th grader at a majority-white middle school. Her responses completely change depending on the race of the children in the picture.
Marcy and Renee are in school together, and they're in the hallway, and I'd like you to tell me what you think is happening in this picture.
She probably looks like she's gonna steal it because Marcia's like, oh no, what happened? And he's like, hey, look, $20.
And so, do you think that Renee is doing something good, bad, or just neutral?
I think she's gonna take the money.
Do you think that Renee and Marcy are likely to be friends or not?
Not really.
And what do you think about Marcy's parents? Do you think they'd be comfortable with her being friends with Renee or not?
Well, if they find out the situation that happened, they might be a little concerned about if Renee's a thief.
Mm-hmm. In this one, we have Erica and Allison, and they're also in the hallway at school. Can you tell me what it seems is happening in this picture?
Allison looks like a sweet girl, so I think that she would pick up Erica's money and give it back to her.
Okay, so then, do you think Allison's doing something good, bad, or neutral?
Pretty good.
And what about Allison and Erica? Do you think they're probably friends or not so much?
Yeah, they're probably friends.
Okay. Do you think Erica's parents would like it if she was friends with Allison?
Yeah.
Her responses, according to our expert, Dr. Melanie Killen, could indicate a subconscious racial bias, a bias that kids develop from messages they hear at school, at home, the characters in the TV shows they watch, and what they see online. And Michaela's reversing the scenarios based on race wasn't unique. 24%, almost a quarter of all children, both white and African American, saw their own race more positively than the other race. And this happened across all ages and all school types, no matter the racial demographics.
What do you think happened in this picture?
The girl pushed her.
And what do you think is going to happen next?
Brandon's going to help her with her books.
So do you think that Randy's doing something that's okay, not okay, or kind of in the middle?
Not okay.
Not okay? Is Andre doing something good, bad, or just okay?
Good.
Michaela's answers were very much in line with her. Michaela's parents, Jim and Jennifer, agreed to watch their daughter's test and talk about her responses.
Well, if they find out the situation that happened, they might be a little concerned about if Renee's a thief.
Mm-hmm.
Allison looks like a sweet girl. So I think that she would pick up Erica's money and give it back to her.
When you see that, what goes through your mind? I mean, is there a conversation you want to have with her? Is there stuff you want to know more about?
I would definitely want to pursue that conversation with her and find out why her perception was different based upon the color of the girl's skin. What changed in that scenario in her head?
It's a teachable moment. It's a realization like, well, maybe we have to do, a better job or focus more on distinguishing about racism and diversity, and just influence our kids and let them know that you have to judge a person by their character, not their skin color.
And it's this possible subconscious racial bias versus explicit bias, actually consciously thinking and verbalizing racism, that our expert says shows how far we need to go, but also how far we've come.
They're not friends, okay?
Explicit racism and prejudice has diminished dramatically over 50 years. But what remains is more the implicit biases and the implicit forms of racism and prejudice. And those are the things that we're not aware of, the things that we do when we don't realize it, because it seems that it's these implicit biases that are still what we really have to work on.
Okay, there you go. So there's some examples of implicit bias. So sometimes we have distortions in our perceptions and how we treat other people, and we don't even realize that we're doing it, which is kind of a awful thing to think about. So it kind of makes you second guess maybe why you're doing the things that you do. Maybe you should think more carefully about the types of decisions that you're making and why you're doing what you're doing. Okay, some other issues to think about when it comes to how we perceive situations and what potentially could be distorting our perceptions. And I mentioned this before when we've talked about evaluating employees from a performance perspective, is this idea of what we call a halo effect, right? So when you have a halo effect, you form an impression of somebody based on one trait that they possess, or a single trait that they possess. And you let that one trait kind of cover everything else that they do, right? So maybe they have one really good thing about them, and because you like that one thing about them, you kind of ignore all of the other bad things that they do, right? Or if you have one really bad thing that they do that you don't like about them, that kind of pollutes all of the good things that they do, right? That's a halo effect. That's a distortion in your perception about that person and potentially their performance, right? That's a halo effect. So another example of a distortion perception is the recency effect. I mentioned this one before as well. This is this idea that we let current or recent information be more important than the overall information when we make decisions. Right? So some examples of that. You have an employee who makes a more recent mistake, and you do their performance review, you let that dominate how you assess their performance. Right? I told you the example before, or I probably mentioned the example before of my boss who used my telephone, my cell phone records as a way to ambush me in my performance review. So I was not prepared to be assessed on using my cell phone because I didn't get to see the bills, and I was going over on my minutes, and he waited until my performance review to whip it out and then take my phone away from me, right? And so that was a mistake that he used, and that was a recent mistake, and he used that mistake to kind of submarine my entire year's worth of performance. This is one of my favorite examples, right? Students' course evals. You give an exam. Students don't perform very well on the exam, and then you give the performance review or the evaluation for the course right after that exam, and then the students base all their course evaluations on that, how they performed on that exam right beforehand, right? That's the example of a recency effect. Another example, people running into the stock market basing on how well a current investment's doing, right? And they ignore trends. Another example, people always get wrapped up on who's the best NBA player in the world or of all time, and they always think about who they think of more recently. So it's always, everybody's thinking it's LeBron, and nobody's ever thinking about Michael Jordan anymore, right? So the recency effect takes place. Other types of distortions. We have what we call causal attributions. So we infer causes for our behavior instead of, actually assigning it correctly. Right? So an example of this is what we call the fundamental attribution bias. Right? So we see somebody make a mistake, and we base that mistake on some personal characteristic that person has, right? Rather than some situation. So a plane crashes, we say it's pilot error, that pilot made a mistake, that's what's wrong. We don't assume that there was something wrong with the plane, there was something wrong with the equipment, there was something wrong with the weather, we just blame it on the pilot, right? That's the fundamental attribution error. We make this assessment that something went wrong based on some personal characteristic. Blame it on the person. The self-serving bias is where we assume that if we have success, it's because we did it, and it has nothing to do with our surroundings. Right? We take responsibility for our success, but we don't take responsibility for our failures. Right? That's a self-serving bias. Both of these are distortions in our perceptions, how we view our surroundings. Another form of perceptual bias or distortion is what we call the self-fulfilling prophecy. Right? This is where maybe we as a manager will create this expectation amongst our employees that they have to do something. And we expect that it will happen, and we will try to make it come true, and in fact it will, as a result, cause it to come true. Sometimes this is called the Pygmalion effect. And our expectations are powerful things for our employees. Sometimes people create their own expectations for themselves, and they cause their own expectations to become a reality, right? Now, if we're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy, we want to make sure that these are good things, right? These are positive things. We want to try to create good potential in our employees and not poor potential. We don't want to create negative self-fulfilling prophecies. Right? We want to have positive outcomes here. All right, let's talk a little bit about attitudes again. So we've talked about these different kinds of perceptions. We've talked about these different kinds of biases. We talked about these different kinds of ways that perceptions can be altered or distorted. Let's talk about how perceptions are important from the perspective of how they shape attitudes. Right? So what are some important attitudes at work? Because attitudes impact behaviors. Right? And an important attitude in the workplace that potentially people have that are different from one another, again, we're talking about individual differences today in this lecture, is the idea of engagement. Right? How do people feel from the perspective of how energized and how enthusiastic are they about the work that they're doing? Right? So ideally, you'd like to have situations where your employees are engaged. Right? The greater the amount that your employees are engaged, the more likely they are to be productive, more likely they are to get more work done, more likely they are to be healthy, the more likely they are to have just better overall work activities, right? So a lot of times we hear about trying to keep employees happy. That's true. That's true. Part of that is this notion of employee engagement. So if you can have a situation where your employees feel like you're developing them, you're recognizing them, they trust you as a manager, they trust the organization, you're more likely to have a situation where they're going to be more engaged. Another really important workplace attitude is the whole notion of job satisfaction. Right? How much do people feel satisfied with their work? Do they feel positive or negative about different aspects of their work? Right? And there's a lot of different components to job satisfaction. You can talk about their pay, their work conditions, their coworkers, their supervisors, all different elements that potentially can be rated from a satisfaction perspective. But the higher levels of satisfaction tends to show strong relationships with things like personal life satisfaction, motivation, decreased levels of absenteeism, turnover, stress, etc. So if you're highly satisfied with your job, you tend to be more motivated, you tend to be more engaged, you tend to see higher levels of performance. So satisfaction and performance are important issues in organizations. Another important attitude in the workplace is the idea of organizational commitment. And this is this notion that you as an organizational individual, as an employee, identify with your organization. You want to stay with your organization, and you're committed to being a part of this organization. And if you have a high degree of organizational commitment, that tends to be positively related to things like satisfaction and performance and lower levels of turnover and higher levels of something called organizational citizenship. I mentioned that before, and I'll talk about it again. That's the idea of going above and beyond, doing more than just what's in your job description, but actually helping your coworkers and helping the organization and trying to make this place a better place to work. So if you're able to find ways to increase commitment, you're probably going to get higher levels of performance and lower levels of turnover from your employees. So all of these attitudes are important. You want to have employees with different types of individual differences. And sometimes you can find employees with very different types of personalities, but they can all have very positive attitudes. You want to find ways to help them, to encourage them, ideally, to have good positive attitudes, good job satisfaction, good organizational commitment, good workplace engagement. All of those are important because they're going to lead to things like higher productivity, higher performance, lower absenteeism, lower turnover, higher organizational citizenship. Again, that's this idea that they're going to help each other, they're going to go above and beyond, they're not just going to do what's in their job description, they're going to find ways to make the organization a better place, and they're not going to engage in what we call counterproductive workplace behaviors. A counterproductive workplace behavior is something like stealing office supplies, or taking an extra long lunch, or doing something that's negative, like harassing your coworkers, or making fun of people, or being talking bad about the organization, or doing things that are negative about the organization. So those are the opposite, basically. I mean, not the exact opposite of citizenship behaviors, but just things that are not healthy for the organization. Right? So if you have positive attitudes, you're not necessarily going to have as much of these counterproductive workplace behaviors occurring. Right? So counterproductive workplace behaviors, things like drug and alcohol abuse, things like disciplinary problems, those can lead to accidents, sabotage, sexual harassment, minor violence, theft, things like that typically happen when you have more counterproductive behaviors. Last thing I want to talk about is this idea of stress, which is another individual difference that people experience, another individual type of behavior that can occur within organizations. Of course, stress is just tension that we feel if we are under different kinds of demands or strains or constraints, and different people handle stress differently. And how we handle stress is important because different kinds of personalities potentially have different abilities to be able to put up with it, right? And different sources of stress exist, right? Some people are more likely to be under stress, right? So if you have what we call a type A personality, if you are somebody who is a consistent worrier, right? You have this obsession with negative thoughts. You're highly neurotic. You're really impatient. You're really deadline oriented. You're really competitive. That's a type A type of person, right? You're going to be more likely to experience stress. If you have a lot of individual task demands, you've got a lot of tasks that you are responsible for, and a lot of people are counting on you to engage in a lot of specific tasks, you're probably going to experience a lot more stress. If you have a lot of roles, like more than one type of thing that you're supposed to be responsible for, right? So role overload, role conflict. You've got more than one type of thing that you're supposed to be doing, and they are combating each other. One thing is kind of coming in to conflict with another, or maybe you don't understand what your role is supposed to be, right? You have role ambiguity, right? One thing seems to be what you're supposed to do, but you're not exactly sure what it's supposed to do. The expectations really aren't well understood. That's a problem. So role demands can lead to stress. Sometimes work-family issues can lead to stress. Your family life interferes with your personal life. Your personal life interferes with your work life. Family issues can often lead to greater degrees of stress. Group issues can also cause stress. You have to work in a group. You don't understand what your coworkers are trying to accomplish. Your productivity decreases because your coworkers aren't good at their work. That can lead to higher stress. Sometimes the organization itself causes stress. Maybe there's something about the culture that you can't handle. Maybe it's a really high pressure environment that is just more conducive to stress than what you can handle. There's all different kinds of potential problems that can occur because of that. How do we deal with it? Ideally, you want to create buffers, right? Something that you can have in your life that'll help you to reduce the level of stress, right? Something that can reduce your stress levels. So buffers can include anything that helps you to build your resilience, right? Anything that can help you along these lines that might include like an assistance program that the organization can put in place, or something that the organization can do to be more supportive. Sometimes organizations can change the job itself, make the job more interesting, or provide you with some sort of counseling, maybe give you a retreat or sabbatical, or maybe temporarily assign you to a new position, or maybe provide you with some sort of recognition or reward or something like that. Organizations can provide you with different types of programs or build in certain kinds of situations to help their employees to reduce their stress, right? And you as a manager can build these kinds of buffers in to help your employees to alleviate their stress. Maybe you open up a yoga studio in your office to help people manage their stress. Okay, so let's wrap this up. So We've talked a lot today about different types of individual differences. We talked about diversity issues. We talked about attitudes. We talked about perceptions. We talked about distortions of perceptions. There's a lot of different things that we've discussed in this material, but obviously there's a lot of differences that people have one from another. Organizations are composed of different people with different backgrounds, different experiences. Diversity is becoming more and more important over time. There's a lot of different types of diversity, both the surface level and the deep level, what we look like on the top versus who we are as people deep down from a personality perspective. We talked about a lot of different types of personality constructs and different types of issues related to personality. We talked about attitudes and the different components of attitudes today and how attitudes are likely to impact behavior. And behavior is the important element here because the most critical element of behavior, typically from an organization's perspective, is things like performance, job performance, citizenship, counterproductive behavior, and then things like turnover, right? Are people going to leave us? So how we deal with individuals and what makes people different from one another is a critical element from a managerial perspective if we're going to get people to work together effectively and manage all these different personalities and be able to accomplish the kinds of work that we want to get accomplished, to get the work done and make sure that we're able to understand each other and create the value that we want to create amongst all of the employees that we have in our highly diversified organizations as we move forward into the future. Okay, that is chapter 11.